Shalom. So the question is, what does it mean to worship in spirit and truth? So this particular thought or idea or search for the understanding of this comes from John chapter 4. Let's look at verses 23 and 24. And this is Yahushua speaking. It says, but the hour is coming and is now when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father is seeking such to worship him. Elohim is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. So this, of course, is a conversation that Yahushua is having with the woman at the well. And, a lot of times people look at the spirit and truth and they isolate it from the context of what's being said here. And then they come up with all these goofy ideas, and try to go dig down deep into this deep meaning when it's really very simple right on the surface. So he says in verse 23, it says, true worshipers, which suggests that there is an untrue worship. So he's juxtaposing two ideas: true worship versus false worship, or unintelligent worship, or unknowing worship. So let's kind of go back and look at the context of what's going on, because he's saying something specific to this woman in relation to her life and what she lives by, right? So let's go back and look briefly at this conversation. So let's look at verse 11, John chapter 4, verse 11. It says, the woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well," right? They're at Jacob's well, "and drank from it himself, as well as his sons and his livestock?" Look at what Yahushua says. He says to her, "Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again," speaking of the water that's in the well. "But whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life." The woman answers, she says to him, "Sir, give me this water that I may not thirst, nor come here to draw." So Yahushua is explaining to her the difference from what she's thinking and what he's saying. So he goes directly from what he just said, "I'm giving you the water of everlasting life," to explaining to her missteps in thought, right? So the woman says to him in verse 15, "Sir, give this water that I may not thirst, nor come here to draw." Yahushua says to her, "Go and call your husband to come here." So he's drawing her to look at herself, at her own life, because he recognizes when she asks of the water, she's asking for something physical, right? She's not understanding that there's nothing physical that is going to satisfy her needs. So he calls her to call her husband. Then she answers, "I have no husband." Yahushua says, "You have said well, I have no husband, for you have 5 husbands, and the one whom you now have is not your husband, in that you spoke truly." So this woman has immoral life, right? She's looking at satisfying herself with men. This is the basic idea that's coming through here, right? So the woman says to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you, the Yahudim, say that in Jerusalem is a place where you ought to worship." So she switches to the understanding of Deuteronomy. So the Samaritans They accepted the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, the Torah, but they didn't accept the history or the prophets. So when she says that our fathers worship on this mountain, but she says, I perceive that you are a prophet, she is looking at something back in Deuteronomy. And she reiterates this in verse 25, but she just mentions it here. And she says, for the fathers worshiped here. So she's talking about a place to go to, right? So true worship is not about a place, right? It says those who are true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. It's not about a place here. So Yahushua says to her, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. What we worship for salvation is of the Yahudah. Salvation is of those who were ushered and saved from slavery in the book of Exodus out of Egypt. That is where salvation come from. All of those who worshiped the Father came through the Hebrew people. They lived like the Hebrew people. They ate like the Hebrew people. They worshiped like the Hebrew people because they were following the Elohim of the Hebrews, Yahuah. So he's telling her and redirecting her from the thoughts in her mind that she had from the Samaritan worship. It's not about a place. Then he says in verse 23, but the hour is coming and now is when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such to worship him. Elohim is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. So spirit and truth is one idea. It's not two separate ideas. Elohim is spirit. The Elohim that resides in you leads you to the understanding of his word, which is truth. What does the scripture say? So Psalm 119, 160 says, thy word is true from the beginning, and every one of thy righteous judgment endure forever. So we see his word is truth.
Your word is truth. Your word is truth. Set apart in your truth. Set apart in your truth. Your word is truth. Your word is the truth. Set apart in your truth. Set apart.
You can look at John chapter 14 verse 6. It says, and Yahushua said unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. So the idea here is that it's not about a place. It's not about your knowledge. It's about understanding what true worship is through Elohim, his spirit, which resides in you, leading you to understanding of his son who has died for you, the word of Elohim. So in other words, there is no idea here that you can have an immoral lifestyle and do these things at this particular place to worship. The truth in the spirit of Elohim that resides in you leads you away from anything that's immoral, leads you away from anything that's not of him, so that when you are worshiping, your lifestyle matches up with the spirit and it coincides with his word. There's a whole lot of spiritual ideas out there that are not attached to the truth of his son, to the truth of his word, and they will lead you down the wrong path. Spiritual truth is the spirit of Elohim as it pertains to his word. Those two things must match. So my lifestyle in true worship exhibits those things in his word. When I'm worshiping, no matter where it is, no matter what place it is, the truth of my worship is that my lifestyle matches up with his spirit. All of the things that the spirit tells me to live by, all of the things that the Spirit tells me my lifestyle should exhibit, the fruit that I should exhibit. Is that true worship? Is that true worship that he's speaking of? She says in verse 25 of chapter 4, the woman said unto him, I know that Messiah cometh, he who is called Christ, he who is called Messiah. When he comes, he will tell us all things. Yahushua said to her, I who speak to you am he. So when we look at that passage, we see that there was an idea that she had of a Messiah coming. And that comes from Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 15. It says, Yahuah your Elohim will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you and your fellow Israelites. You must listen to him. Verse 18 says, I will raise up from them a prophet like you from among fellow Israelites and put my words in his mouth. He will tell them everything I command. Now we know that throughout Israel's history, he did that through his prophets. But the prophetical idea is that this will be the prophet. My son will have not only my spirit, but my words. In Philippians, Paul gives that same idea. Philippians chapter 3, verse 3, he says, for we are the circumcision who worship Elohim in spirit, rejoice in Yahushua Messiah, and have no confidence in the flesh. This whole idea that there could be a place, or there could be a way, or the way you hold your hands, or the way you speak. The idea is that it is not of the flesh, but of the true circumcision of the heart. It's an inward thing, not something we do outward. Spirit and truth. She was definitely empowered by the Ruach after her encounter with Yahushua. When he's talking to Nicodemus, one of the things that he says to him, he says, you're teaching the word, but you yet don't know these things. The idea behind what he's saying to him is that you have this truth, you have this word, you're teaching it, but you don't have the spirit residing in you to give you understanding to what it means. In the case of the woman, he's saying you have this spiritual place that you go to, but there's no truth matched with that spirit to give you an understanding of what true worship is. Understanding that you're worshiping in spirit and in truth by the Ruach as it pertains to the word. It goes together. You can't have a separate spiritual worship with outside the word. The worship that you have has to fit in the confines of his word, which means that I can't be living immorally and say that I'm in the right place to worship. I can't have these two different ideas, because if I'm living righteously, then I'm walking in his spirit and I'm worshiping in his truth. I'm living according to his word and I'm giving him worship. Just like the Israelites, they couldn't worship Yahuah until they sacrificed for their past sin. They weren't able to go into the tabernacle and worship if they hadn't first been forgiven of their sin. So in spirit and in truth, Nicodemus is more speaking of understanding that his teaching had to be tied with the Ruach residing in him, and not a man-made idea of just, I have this knowledge that I'm teaching. So we solidify that the woman, that Yahushua tells the woman, true worshipers worship in spirit and in truth. So both are needed. And then direct opposite of the spectrum, we see John chapter 3 in dealing with Nicodemus. Nicodemus asking the question, verse 4, he says, how can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born? Yahushua answers, most assuredly, I say to you, unless one is born of water and of spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of Elohim. So what does that mean? To be born of water and of spirit. So this is the answer is actually in the next verse, or at least part of the answer. In verse 6 it says, that which is born of flesh is flesh, and that which is born of spirit is spirit. Do not marvel that I say to you, you must be born again. The wind blows where it wishes, and you hear the sound of it, but cannot tell where it comes from and where it goes. So is everyone who was born of spirit. So this whole idea that Yahushua is introducing to him, he's explaining to him that there's something that is obtained, that you must, something that has to be obtained that can't come from the flesh. So the opposite of the woman, Nicodemus, had truth. He was a teacher of the word. He was a rabbi. He was a scholar. He was the teacher of the day. And we know that because Yahushua says in verse 10, first Nicodemus says to him, how can these things be? Verse 10, he says, Yahushua says to him, are you a teacher of Israel and do not know these things? Most assuredly, I say to you, we speak what we know and testify what we have seen, and you do not receive our witness. I have told you earthly things, and you do not believe. How will you believe if I tell you heavenly things? No one has ascended to heaven, but he who came down from heaven, that is the Son of Man, who is in heaven. Right? So we look at this and we understand that Yahushua is telling him that there's something that is needed to be in the kingdom. Not just truth, but also spirit. You need to be born of water and of spirit. He also brought in the idea of flesh versus spirit. So what is he saying? Paul helps us out in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. He further expands on this idea of flesh and spirit. Let's read. It says in chapter 15 of 1 Corinthians, starting in verse 35, he says, but someone will say, how are the dead raised up? And with what body do they come? Foolish one. What do you sow, or what you sow is not made alive unless it dies. And what you sow, you do not sow that the body shall be. That body that shall be. But mere grain, perhaps wheat or some other grain. But Elohim gives it a body as he pleases, and to each seed its own body. So he goes on to explain flesh. He says all flesh is not the same flesh, but there is one kind of flesh of men, another flesh of animals, another of fish, another of birds. Verse 40, there are also celestial bodies and terrestrial bodies, but the glory of the celestial is one, and the glory of the terrestrial is one. There is one glory of the sun, another glory of the moon, another glory of the stars, for one star differs from another star in glory. Verse 42. So also is the resurrection of the dead. The body is sown in corruption. It is raised in incorruption, right? So as a signification of baptism, you go in dead, you come up alive. Verse 43, it is sown in dishonor, and raised in glory. It is sown in weakness and raised in power. It is sown in a natural body and raised in a spiritual body. So we see the direct connection between the natural and the spiritual, the flesh and the spiritual, the water and the spiritual. There is a natural body, verse 43 or verse 44, and there is a spiritual body. And it is, and so it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a life-giving Ruach spirit. 46. However, the spiritual is not first, but the natural, and the afterward, the spiritual. So we have the flesh, born of water, and we have the spiritual, right? The body, born of spirit. The first man was of the earth, made of dust. The second man is the master from heaven. As the man of dust, so also are those who are made of dust, and is the heavenly man. So also are those who are heavenly. So we see this complete idea of the natural and the spiritual, the first Adam and the second Adam, the man of flesh, the man of spirit. Verse 49, and as we have borne the image of man of dust, we also bear the image of the heavenly man. Now, this I say, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of Elohim, nor does corruption inherit incorruption. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we all shall be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when the corruptible has put on incorruptible, and the mortal has put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your sting? O Hades, where is your victory? Verse 56, the sting of death is sin. The strength of sin is the law, the Torah. But thanks be to Elohim who gives us victory through Yahushua Messiah. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the master, knowing that your labor is not in vain in him. So this complete idea of water and spirit is not a new idea. And as we look at the last passage, to bring forth this full understanding, I want to look at Ezekiel chapter 36, because this gives us a complete understanding of the idea of born of water and of spirit. He says in verse 24 of Ezekiel 36, he says, for I will take you from among the nations, gather you out of all countries, and bring you into your own land. Then I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. I will cleanse you from your filthiness and from your idols. And I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will take the heart of stone out of your flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes, and you will keep my judgments and do them. Then you shall dwell in the land that I gave to your fathers. You shall be my people, and I will be your Elohim. So we see this whole complete idea coming to a complete understanding as we see the Father's plan from the beginning was to cleanse us, was to fill us with his spirit so that we can walk the way that he wants us to walk. So this whole idea, both with the woman at the well and with Nicodemus, is that they need Not just truth, but spirit. Praise you.